Welcome to the Church and Culture Podcast, a weekly discussion with Dr. James Emery White on the latest trends happening in culture and where and how the church should respond. Jim is the founding and senior pastor of Mecklenburg Community Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, president of Serious Times, a ministry devoted to exploring the intersection of faith and culture, former professor of theology and culture at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where he also served as their fourth president, and the author of more than 20 books. I am your host, Alexis Dry, and I can't wait to dive into this week's conversation. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. If you've been reading any news headlines lately, I'm sure you've noticed that Starbucks has been in the news a lot. CEO Brian Niccol, who took over last September, he recently announced that Starbucks would be slashing about 30% of their menu items so that they can make space in their menu for better innovation. And it was also announced that they'd be discontinuing their beloved open door policy, making Starbucks bathrooms and lounges accessible only to Starbucks customers. More popular are the plans to offer free coffee refills to customers using ceramic mugs or personal cups, and coming back are the condiment stations, which had been removed because of the pandemic. Now, Starbucks baristas have also been given the green flag to write not only a customer's name on their cup, but also a short inspirational message. So, what is behind all these changes? It's probably not a coincidence that Starbucks sales declined last quarter in the US and globally. And so in response, Niccol has declared that he wants Starbucks to become a third space once again. Jim, what is he talking about?
I don't know, but I'm glad about those condiment stations. I was driving me crazy having to tell them just put in equals or whatever. No, the third place is a very important idea. Most people have two social environments, or we think of ourselves as having two social environments, home and workplace for the typical person, or depending upon your situation in life, the home and your school. But there was a book that came out over 25 years now called The Great Good Place, and it was by a guy named Ray Oldenburg. And he argued that we need what he called a third place. His thesis was that the home is where we live and constitutes who we live with. Our workplace or school is where we spend most of our time, but is very task-oriented in nature in terms of its atmosphere and the culture around it. His idea is that we really do need a third place to provide a mooring for community life and wider, more fluid, creative interaction. And here's what he said marks a good third place. If you're unfamiliar with the ideas in his book, and if I go through this, if it sounds a lot like Starbucks, well, this is where Starbucks got it from. First, he said they should be free, this place, or at least really inexpensive. They should provide food and drink. They should be highly accessible, even walking distance. Frequently, your third place should be in walking distance. They should encourage regulars, people who would be considered a regular customer. They should be welcoming and comfortable. And finally, they should allow for both new friends and old to be found in its confines. Now, this is not exactly a novel idea. If anybody's ever been to the UK, I think it's safe to say that the third place has been the pub for quite some time. In the Middle East, you could argue the hookah lounge would fit that bill. In the United States, though, we really didn't have one. That is until Starbucks burst onto the scene. They took Oldenburg's ideas and intentionally tried to become that third place, or sometimes, as you refer to it, called a third space. And it worked. Starbucks started in 1971 in Pike Place Market in Seattle. If you've never been to Pike Place Market in Seattle, that's worth a trip. That's a fun place to be. But anyway, it started in Pike Place in 1971, actually not as a coffee place, but as a coffee bean wholesaler. And if you say, why do I know all this stuff? Because I used to live in Seattle when I was growing up for a little while. But it was converted into a coffee shop. You remember I used to hop on a bus when I was a little boy, or boys in high school, but I would get on the public bus, and there was a music store down there in Pike Place Market and other things that I would go to. It was just a lot of fun. But anyway, it was converted into a coffee shop under the ownership of a man named Howard Schultz, and who was CEO from the mid-1980s until 2000. And he's the one that really led to its aggressive expansion, but also its attempt to be a third place for people in the United States and around the world. And for many, that's really what made the difference. It was never about the coffee itself. You could maybe make an argument that it got to be a little bit about coffee culture, but really it wasn't ever about the coffee. A lot of taste comparisons put Dunkin' or even McDonald's ahead in the taste department. No, what Starbucks had, that's where you would go to read a book. That's where you'd go to meet a friend. That's where you go to get together with others to work on a project or study for an exam. It has been a third place, and one that we obviously wanted and one that we obviously needed. A little aside on that, I mentioned that in the UK, pubs have traditionally filled that role. I remember the first pub I ever visited during my very first trip to England. And this was, again, long time ago. Long time ago. But I flew into London and into Heathrow, and then immediately, because of a speaking engagement I was doing, I hopped on a plane to go to Manchester. And after landing, as I was riding in a cab to the hotel, I asked my driver, I said, look, help me fulfill a long, long dream. I want to go to a real, honest to goodness, authentic English pub. I said, can you steer me toward one? And he didn't even pause. He said, he gave me the name, told me how I could walk to it from where I was staying. And so I still remember it. It was filled with men and women and children, and outside there were pets, and it was by this small water channel with these, if you've ever been there, you've seen these long, narrow houseboats moored on the edge. And I went to the counter and just asked a few questions about the history of the place, because like a lot of pubs there, had a very long history, hundreds of years. And then I heard somebody nearby just said, well, where are you from? I was kind of shocked to be addressed by a stranger. But like I said, it was my first pub experience. So I just said, well, the United States. He says, I know that. I realized how much of my American accent must have stood out. So I said, well, North Carolina, are you familiar with where that is? And then someone else shouted out, well, I've been to Atlanta. And someone else said, well, I got family in Texas. And someone else said, Charlotte. Is that near Phoenix? I'm an introvert, and I loved every minute of it. And it was just a delightful evening, and it felt like home, or as they say, a third place.
Yeah. Well, I can say that Starbucks for me was a third space for probably a decade or so of my life. I remember, going there probably 2 or 3 times a week during my college years, and shortly after that, for any variety of meetings, work meetings, school meetings, just catching up with friends. So all that to say, what changed? Why is Starbucks, or really any local coffee shop at this point, no longer our predominant third space or third place?
Well, I think everybody probably has opinions that liked Starbucks or likes it and maybe has felt certain changes. But when you read various articles and how Starbucks themselves have tried to get at this, but when you read various articles about Starbucks in relation to how it's losing its place as a third place, several things tend to come up in the conversation. One is that a lot of other businesses got in on this. I mean, quite frankly, got in on the whole third place idea and did it well, if not better, than Starbucks. And one great example are just all the microbreweries that have popped up all over the United States. Here in Charlotte, we're like one of the brewery capitals. People come here for brewery tours like they go to Kentucky for whiskey tours. When I think of a third place here in Charlotte, I think of a brewery more than I do a Starbucks a lot of times. People can read into that whatever they want. But that's largely because, seriously, Charlotte breweries, and we've become a bit known for them, are really fashioned more like the English pub. And one of my favorites, Old Mecklenburg Brewery, is family friendly. It's got this playground for the kids. I mean, it's got a big beer garden. And by the way, people wonder why the name of the church that I have the privilege of leading is called Mecklenburg Community Church. It's because here in Charlotte, we live in Mecklenburg County. So the name Mecklenburg, or Meck, is one of our biggest identity markers. So it may sound weird to people, but it's like, like we lived in Houston, be like Houston Church or something like that. So back to Old Mecklenburg Brewery. It has a big beer garden, like I said, like you would find in Europe. And around Christmas, it has outdoor markets like you would find over there, and big fire pits, and people bring their pets. It's just a great place to meet and talk and be. And another reason for Starbucks struggling is that Starbucks, quite frankly, stopped, a lot of them. I mean, there's thousands of them, but a lot of them stopped being a good third place. They didn't just have competition. They just stopped being a good one. They became sterile in their atmosphere, oriented toward just mass production of drinks, getting people in and out like a cattle cart. They went from a third place to what felt like a glorified drive-through or a pickup place, like a fast food restaurant. You drive by a lot of Starbucks and you think drive-through, but you wouldn't think about it. Didn't look inviting to go park and just want to go hang out there for an hour or two. I mean, it just didn't, this small brick box or something. There was no character, no nooks and crannies, no comfortable seats, no atmosphere. And the baristas, there's no way they could know your name. There's no way they could even hardly make eye contact with you. They're running around frantically just to keep up with the drinks. You don't even feel invited or wanted to open up your laptop or pull out a book and stay. By the way, just since I'm doing a lot of asides here, if I can brag on our bookstore and cafe, the Grounds, oh my gosh, it really is a third place for people all throughout the week. We have people filling every chair on both floors. There's a loft area and down and just bookstore that is a very good bookstore, I might add, I would think, in terms of titles carried. And but come and work and hang out. And gosh, I would say maybe 50-60% of the people there at any given moment don't even attend MEC. But it's got this wonderful vibe and tons of meetings and things going on. And it's just, it's a wonderful third place. In every way Starbucks used to be, but better, I think. But a third reason why I think Starbucks may be declining, and I would argue this might be the most significant, is that an entirely new third place, or something that allowed maybe a bit of a bypass of Starbucks, came out on the scene. I don't mean a competing third place. It's like a Starbucks, like a brewery. I mean a really totally different kind of place. And of course, I'm talking about the internet. People forget that the growth of Starbucks, its meteoric rise, was all before the digital revolution took place in terms of like the iPhone. I mean, it started, it was even before the internet. I mean, in 1987, okay, there were only 17 Starbucks in the United States. 1987, just 17. By 2007, there were over 15,000 in over 40 countries. Now, as this meteoric growth happened, you look at just 87 to 2007. Okay, that was before the world exploded digitally, because in 2007, at the end of that meteoric rise and run, that's when the release of the first iPhone took place. The iPhone wasn't even around prior to that. That's not all that happened in 2007. Beyond the iPhone, and you and I have talked about this, I think, in other places or offline somewhere, but Facebook left the campus and entered the wider world in 2007. Twitter was spun off in 2007. Google bought YouTube and launched Android in 2007. Amazon released the Kindle in 2007. Little-known company named Netflix started streaming videos in 2007. And the internet crossed 1 billion users worldwide, which was the tipping point to it becoming the fabric of our world. Again, all in 2007, which is why in my book, Hybrid Church, I borrowed a line from Thomas Friedman, and I have a chapter titled, What the Heck Happened in 2007? Because that was a line from one of his things, only he didn't say heck. My publisher, Zondervan, wanted to put in a few asterisks there. Now, to be clear, the internet didn't kill Starbucks. Last year, 2024, there were over 40,000 Starbucks outlets in 87 countries, I think. But as the internet and digital technology has taken over our lives, it has increasingly offered us an alternative third place. I wrote about this actually first in my book, Meet Generation Z, where this was really starting to happen, how the third place was starting to look like it could be online. If you look at some of the apps that Gen Z was using related to communities, such as a house party, it allows video chats with up to 7 of your friends. And when a couple of people open it and start chatting, a push alert says that these people are in the house, and it's sent to everyone that you're connected with. And soon the room fills up. And those experiences have been made possible by the availability of video chat in messaging apps like Kik and Facebook Messenger, as well as standalone apps like FAM or Tribe or Airtime or Uvu and House Party. It's been called live chilling. And again, some are now calling it the new third place. And all things pandemic, of course, only accelerated the move to those kinds of apps. So you can kind of think of the internet challenge this way, or the internet, how it changed things this way. Baby boomers went to their friend's house after school, or as an adult, went to a small group in a home through their church. Generation X would call their friends on the phone after school. Millennials used AOL, Instant Messenger, and later text messaging to keep up with their friends. Gen Z is back to having the party at the house, only it's through their phone. And so now you could argue that Starbucks is perfectly suited for this world. I mean, that it is perfectly suited, designed for this, that it just makes sense to let people order a drink through an app or through their phone and pick it up on their way. I mean, after all, you could say, well, they're in the coffee business. So why, so what? So when you read that 7 out of every 10 Starbucks orders are completed through a mobile app or drive-through, you might say, well, they done good. They adapted well. But were they really in the coffee business? Or were they in the third place business? See, that's what they've been struggling with of late, with declining sales in coffee. They're finding that they really were in the third place business, enhanced by coffee, or now wine and beer and a lot of other things, because they're trying to, they got the craft breweries to think about. Which is why all the changes that you mentioned at the beginning, when you were introducing this topic for us to talk about, are being pursued. Sales are in a decline. In fact, they had their worst quarter of decline in last year, in 2024. The worst, at least, didn't involve a pandemic or a recession. And they're wanting to get back into being the Starbucks of old. Coffee, yes, but more than anything, a place you want to just go and be and hang out, which is why their new CEO, I think we both read this in one article that we were sharing with each other, but one CEO on his second day on the job released a statement that was called "Back to Starbucks." Second day on the job was how keenly he saw this as the problem. And he described Starbucks, he said, as a gathering space, a community center where conversations are sparked and friendships form and everyone is greeted by a welcoming barista. That's smart, because while a digital revolution has certainly happened and community can happen online, it can. Various forms and levels of community certainly can happen online. It'd be foolish to say otherwise. We're all involved in it every day. But I don't know that it really ever can be a third place the way the neighborhood pub was a third place, the way a good coffee shop is a third place, or a good brewery is a third place, or, and we can talk about this more, way churches used to be a third place.
It must have been so difficult for the previous CEO, Howard Schultz, as you mentioned, who really pioneered that concept of a third place with Starbucks, to just see the revolution of it. I was reading an article in which he commented on a podcast last year about one of his recent visits to Starbucks. And he said that rather than finding, guests lounging and connecting over coffee, he just found this flurry of people kind of hovered over the to-go counter, all anxiously waiting for their drink to be announced. And then when it was, they just took it to go. As you mentioned, 7 of 10 Starbucks orders are completed through the app or drive-thrus. He called it, I'm quoting him here, he said it was a mosh pit. Okay, I'll be honest. I couldn't help but immediately think of the implications of that for the church. I think about the way that people will often just quickly enter and exit a service, like never speaking a word to another person there. It's almost like a form of to-go spirituality. You feel like that's a stretch?
Oh, yeah. I do. Sounds good. And then you kind of go, what?
All right, explain yourself.
Well, I will take the bait, though. Going back to Schultz, you're right. I can only imagine how hard that must have been. I read he wrote a book, and I may not get this title completely right, but I think it was called Pour Your Heart Into It. And that was his biography. That was his book on Starbucks and the experience. And yeah, I would imagine it would be very hard for him. But let me chase the general idea of what you said. Starbucks filled a niche for a third place because culture needed one. A third place that used to be filled, as I mentioned a minute ago, for many by the church. So you could say that as the church lost its place as a third place, whether through secularization, people stopped going to churches, or just because churches weren't trying to be that third place anymore, Starbucks filled this relational, communal gathering void. Okay. So in that sense, you could say the church should be more like Starbucks, at least the Starbucks of old. So I think, to your point, that what the church does not want to do or be is to become what Starbucks has become over the last half a dozen years, which is essentially a fast food outlet. That's pretty sterile and not very communal. That was never its appeal, though. It was never just about getting a cup of coffee. It was about a place to be. So if churches do become like many Starbucks are today, in and out, drive through, pickup, no sense of community, no sense of place, that would be counter to the very idea of a church as a community of faith. And yes, no church should ever want to be anything like that.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, you kind of hinted this to already, but it's interesting that, I might say too, that if it weren't for the declining sales, some might argue that Starbucks doesn't have anything to complain about. Like, people are still, if they're not buying into the third place vision, they're still buying coffee. And if anything, I guess mobile ordering and to-go counters, they're still allowing them to serve more customers than even their brick and mortar spaces would allow. And you say that they're finding out that they aren't just in the coffee business, but that they're in the community business. Well, again, let me kind of tie this to the church. What about the church? Like, when does getting the good news about Jesus out to as many people as possible conflict with the vision of creating Christ-centered communities? Like, I think every church has to answer, are we in the evangelism business or in the community discipleship business? I already know what you're going to say, which is yes. So go ahead.
Actually, what I was going to say was sometimes I think you craft questions just to get me riled up, just so I can go on a rip. Let me tell you, but let me go on that rip, because you raise a lot of things that people might think or feel or wonder about, and I want to give, and I have answers that I feel very passionately about, and with a deep, 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 strong conviction, and that form the church that I lead down to its core DNA. Let me tell you a caricature that I feel needs to be exposed and dismissed with great force and fervor. It's the idea that if a church emphasizes outreach or growth, then it must be doing it by sacrificing discipleship and community, that those two are at war with each other. Emphasizing outreach, growth, evangelism is at war with community, discipleship, spiritual formation. It has to be. There's this idea that you can't do community and discipleship optimally if you do evangelism and outreach optimally and with full adrenaline. It's not true. And I will fight over that one. That's a hill I will die on. Because if you believe it, if you believe that's true, then you're saying Jesus lied. And that's why I get really testy about it. You're saying Jesus lied, because he's the one who said that we were to do both, and that both must coexist in the church. The Great Commission makes it very clear we're to do both evangelism and discipleship. Doing one does not automatically negate the other. And let me just go further. If you aren't doing evangelism, you're not going to have anybody to disciple. And if you are doing evangelism, you'll be forced into discipleship, because you're going to be reaching people for Jesus, and you're going to be forced into all kinds of creative processes and thinking and strategic discipleship classes and mentoring programs and Bible studies and next steps, because you've got all these new believers around you. All to say, it is not an either or. It is a both and a very important both and a very biblical both and. We have been charged by Jesus to have it be a both and. Now let's expose, though, another caricature that's tied at the hip to that if a church is large, it's not community-based. It's not doing community well. Can't do community well if it's large. You're going to have to help me with that one. Just like evangelism and discipleship can be pitted against each other, size and community can be pitted against each other, as if God wants every church to be small, or maybe in a house or something, I don't know, because small is best, and it's the only way to have optimum community, and because community can't happen in a larger setting, and that's the cardinal value. There's so much wrong with that thinking, Alexis. So much wrong. First and foremost, it's not biblical. People forget that when the Holy Spirit birthed the church at Pentecost, it involved 3,000 new converts in a single day. Instant megachurch. That's how the Holy Spirit started the church, with a megachurch. That's what the Holy Spirit desired. That's what he purposed. That's what brought about. That's what happened. And so it was the Holy Spirit's desire, and with a thrill of the heart. And now, so you had 3,000 dumped on 11 people. I think that's called an assimilation, community, discipleship train wreck. But it wasn't. It was just like, welcome to church, get to work, you know? But let's look at it from a functional perspective. That large churches can't be places of warm community. They are by nature impersonal and cold. The truth is that large churches can't be impersonal and cold. Think about it. They wouldn't be large if they were. I mean, people would vote with their feet. Most large churches are, in fact, exceptionally friendly. They work on it with enormous intentionality, doing everything they can to serve first-time guests at every point of need. They often they throw open the doors every weekend with guests in mind, and with entire ministries devoted to that guest experience and to welcoming new people in and helping them get connected. If there wasn't some serious relational Velcro in play at large churches, they would never have become big. Most large churches do a very good job at connecting people to community through such things as small groups and serving teams and such. In fact, they're keenly aware that if someone doesn't connect with 4 or 5 others within 5 or 6 months or so, they're going to start to drift. So they're all about it. That's why they work so hard at getting people involved. And again, let me just state the obvious, because I'm not anti-small church. I love the church wherever she's at. And there are some churches that are small in areas that, quite frankly, they ought to be seen as a mega church. I mean, you got a church of 50 in a town of 5,000, you've reached 10% or so of that, or 1% or more of that town. I haven't done that to Charlotte. I haven't come close. So, so it's not putting a small church down, but I don't like big churches being put down as if automatically they're not friendly. Some of the most unfriendly, cold, cliquish churches in the world are small. That's why they're small. And some of those friendly, warmest churches in the world are large churches. That's how they got large. And so we need to be clear on that. And you may not know everybody's name, but the main thing with community is knowing a group of people's names and that they know your name. And, it's not that you've had been able to have private coffees with the senior pastor. The question is, are you being cared for and shepherded, and are there spans of care? Because, if somebody feels like, well, I've got to have private time with the senior leader, well, then now you've got a personality driven church, which isn't even healthy. You shouldn't care that much about someone like me. I'm not that important. I'm not the church. So we really need to ground ourselves in what is our mission? What business are we in? You asked it, which is it? Is it evangelism or community? And of course, the answer, as you knew I was going to say, was yes. So, but let's be really clear though about it, because churches get this messed up all the time. One of my favorite business stories that helps with this comes from the late 1800s. No business matched the financial and political dominance of the railroad, if you study that era of history. Trains dominated the transportation industry in the United States, moving people and goods throughout the country. Railroad barons were the tech titans of the day. And then a new discovery came along, the car. And incredibly, the leaders of the railroad industry did not take advantage of their unique position to participate in that pivotal transportation development. The automotive revolution was happening all around them, and they did not use their industry dominance to take hold of the opportunity. Business guru Tom Peters, maybe a contemporary example would be like, think about the phone industry not taking advantage of the development of the iPhone, which they didn't, which is why Apple has it and not Bell. Or in fact, is there even a Bell company anymore? I don't even know. Business guru Tom Peters points out the reason: the railroad barons didn't understand what business they were in. Peters observes that they thought that they were in the train business. In fact, they were in the transportation business. Time passed them by, as did the opportunity. And see, that's such a subtle thought. They thought they were in the train business. They were in the transportation business. They should have been all over the car, but instead they fought it, resisted it. They couldn't see what their real purpose was. Churches can make the same mistake, the mistake of not seeing what business they're really in. We're not in the small group business. We're not in the Sunday school business. We're not in the men's ministry business or anything else that churches can invest themselves in programmatically. These things can be fine and good, but that's not the target on the wall. At best, they're a means to an end, to be dropped, molded, amended, added as needed. If you make those things your business, you would be like the railroads thinking they were in the train business instead of the transportation business. So what business are we in? Well, it's a fivefold business: worship, ministry, evangelism, discipleship, and community. And we pull those five things from all over Scripture, but so many concise descriptions of the early church give us those dynamics, such as Acts 2:42 through 47, a classic primer, classic picture window into the life of the early church in all five marks. You find there that the church was a learning church. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the Scriptures. So discipleship, they were a learning church. It was a loving church, community-based, loving and being loved, and knowing and being known, serving and being served, and celebrating the one another's of the Bible were being fleshed out. It was a giving church. Generosity was flowing through it. The widow, the orphan, the hungry, the homeless. It was a gathering church, gathering to worship and to celebrate the sacraments. It was a reaching church. The pinnacle of Acts 2:47, the last statement made, was this stirring thing. It says, "And the Lord was adding to their number daily those who were being saved." So worship, ministry, evangelism, discipleship, and community. I mean, that's what we're being about. But then you have to ask yourself, so what is that trying to come together to do? Those might be the business we're in, but what are we trying to have those five things accomplish? Okay. Well, it's to turn irreligious people into fully devoted followers of Christ. It's the Great Commission. Go into the world, reach them, and then develop them. Fully devoted followers, reaching unchurched people, turning irreligious people into fully devoted followers. So as you know, here at MEC, we make that into a bit of a flywheel, and in terms of how we're trying to make this business happen functionally. And so it's a very simple 4-stage flywheel, evangelize the lost, then assimilate the evangelized, then disciple the assimilated, and then unleash the discipled, to go right back to, among 1,000 other things, but primarily evangelizing the lost. And then we're going to assimilate the evangelized, and we're going to disciple the assimilated, and then we're going to unleash the disciple. That's our business. And when the church is being the church, it is a wonderful, beautiful, powerful, amazing thing. It's not just a cool third place. It's the very work of God.
Well, I guess I should say thank you to Starbucks for inspiring today's conversation, as we wish them well in returning to their third place status. Hopefully it just provides those of us in the church, especially in leadership roles, to really rethink what kind of business we're in and how we might not make some of the mistakes that have haunted churches in the past. So yeah. Awesome. Well, I always love giving you these conversations, hearing you get all passionate about them. So I'm glad this is another one that ticked that box. So thank you, Jim, for sharing this with us. Thank you guys for giving us your ear this week. And we hope you'll join us again next week.